Welcome allesammans. We have a very special episode for you today. We are speaking about shamanism and comparing and contrasting between three traditions here. That is, shamanism parallels in the Norse sources and Scandinavian folk tradition, and it is records of similar shamanic type practices in the east of Europe. And we have a great and special guest, Stefan from the World Tree, speaking about those things. He specializes in Slavic paganism and mythology, so you guys can check out his channel for the full podcast. This is just a short clip of it. And we also have Christina from Sacred Temple Wellness, who is an expert in things, all type of shamanism from the East and from North and South America. So we are speaking about all kinds of topics in this video, everything from like meditation and trance states and how that relates to shamanic practices. We are speaking about mythologies and folklore and how we can trace these to shamanic type practices. And we're speaking even about war and healing and how these were used there. So quick clip to the video here, but again, go visit Stefan's channel for the full podcast, and I will put a link to that below. That's what a shaman is. Of course, it's practices that are from all around the world. We all have similar practices like that. But the original shaman word that came from Siberia, and then the Russians kind of made it their own into their language, and they're the ones who really kind of spread it through the world with their scholarship in the last 1 or 200 years. But I always find it really interesting how the shamanism is technically a Russian word and practice. And so we don't think of it as like a traditionally European or even a Slavic thing. It's mostly coming from the Eastern Russia, like Siberia. But that is not correct at all, because we have Stefan here, and he knows a lot of things, a lot of parallels related to shamanism from the Slavic tradition. So would you maybe, Stefan, tell us quickly about your background and the research you've done, and kind of what led you to discover the topics of shamanism in the east of Europe?
Yeah, well, I have been researching Slavic, paganism, mythology, and so forth, primarily because of my personal interest, and because it's a very obscure topic, and there's not a lot of sources. It hasn't been written down, so it's very difficult to come to some real historically confirmed practices and so forth. But at the same time, the folklore of Slavic people is thankfully kind of very conservative in this sense, and it has preserved many interesting, let's say, practices, incantations, and similar things which could be related to other shamanic practices of other people in Europe and beyond. So I've only researched it from this perspective, not very deeply like practicing or anything like that.
Interesting. All right. Well, so we touched on it already, but now we're getting to the good part. Battle. How is shamanism type things used in battle? Berserkers, shape shifting, cursing, bringing fear or blunt weapons to an enemy. Those are the things that we touched on a little bit before, but we can go into a bit more depth in it now. Of course, all of the above in Norse. How much of it was actually shamanism is hard to say. One tale, when there was a battle, there was one man laying by himself in the hall, and he was controlling a bear. So we think he was meditating and sending his soul out, and he controlled a bear that was ferocious and destroying the battlefield. That's a pretty actual historical saga, we think. We also have Odin, who was said to be able to help his warriors in a few ways. He chanted Galded. We don't know if they considered this shamanism at all, but Odin chanted Galded, like magical songs, so he could protect his warriors in battle. He could bring fear to the opposing enemy force. He could make the opposing enemy force have their weapons blunted so they can't cut. And we this is just mythology, of course, but we find this in, again, at least a dozen historical sagas when some witch in the village or some kind of shamanic-like figure um, chanted curses or did something on the outside of the battlefield, a short distance away, and they could bring a storm. They could also blunt the enemy's weapons, again, just like Odin did. The Normans, actually, when they were invading England, so this was long after the Vikings had settled there, and they were officially Christian by that time, but they brought a witch with them to battle, and they set her up on a platform, and she was dancing, and she was showing her ass, and she was chanting curses at the other side. It seemed like that was definitely a later on a parallel of Seidr, actually, which is what the Norse shamanism is equated to, and that was the Normans using that when their ancestors used that probably hundreds of years before. So that's just a few records of how we can say they used shamanism, possibly, or just general magic in battle. But I think there's a lot more in the Slavic tradition, so you can take over and speak about that.
I'm not sure if there's a lot more in the Slavic tradition, but there's definitely parallels which are very interesting. The thing is, it can get a bit confusing with the terminology, and I'm trying to be simple, but sometimes it's not possible. As I said before, originally the term for the dragon, which was Zmei, Zmai, or whatever, was related to underworld, energies and forces and the underworld gods and so forth. In the Slavic South, a bit afterwards, it changed, and the term for the dragon became to be associated actually with the storm god, with the sky god, with the highest god, who was essentially accompanied by these dragon people, right? So in the South, basically, the term got a meaning of what we would say shaman, somebody who can practice such weather shamanism. And apparently Perun was, the leader of these people, because we clearly see it in legends and in folklore. And so what's interesting is that this same term used for these people, among many terms, is also applied to epic heroes who fight against historically, Turkish oppression or so forth, but also against dragons and other mythical creatures. And this term is very often, because we're talking about folklore, and the folklore is much later, and so it's not so reliable as actual historical sources or sagas or the Eddas and everything that you have. So terms become a lot, they mix, because people develop various beliefs, superstitions, and so forth. But we can see how the same term was used for heroes, for actual people who were, who embodied heroism and who were said to be descendants of the dragon, so essentially Perun, and a fairy or a nymph, right? So you have the merging of the celestial storm god father and the earth feminine principle, thereby born from this. And we also see that in the songs they're always donning, bear skin, or let's say a hat made of 12 wolf pelts or things like that, And this is interesting because there is another term, one of the many terms used for these people is vukodlak or volkodlak, and it essentially means wolf-haired or wolf-pelted. And Of course, we don't have actual sources that suggest that there were Slavic warriors who wore wolf pelts and so forth. But when you make the comparative mythology and folklore, scholars have suggested that this is the case because there's nothing else that it can be, because we have the clear parallels between a type of shamanism which is related to weather and protecting the crops in the community, but also being a heroic leader of the same community, or a heroic protector of the same community. So,
Was there anything else? I'd like to think that it's a big Indo-European thing that goes back to when we were all one people 8,000 years ago. Because I haven't read too much about that in other cultures around the world. But Christina, have you read anything like that? Not, it doesn't necessarily have to stick on like shamanism used for battle, but any kind of animal skins taking on the form of an animal, anything just like anything suggesting that warriors could be spiritual as well.
Well, definitely the warrior thing is a little bit of my weak point as far as this knowledge and stuff goes. But what I can share with that is very common, like to use the strengths of an animal for protection. That's something you find very, very commonly. Like Stefan was saying, I'll piggyback off of that, the divine masculine and divine feminine. In most cultures, at least my findings, I really should have been an anthropologist, like by paper, is what I should have been in life. But there's always that divine masculine, divine feminine, and the masculine energy is something that you always wanted to tap into in order to help be that protector, that leader, and things like that. And yes, in the end, use that for battle, because you want to connect with that animal spirit, that strength, to use it for your endeavors. So it's not necessarily a shamanic thing, so to speak. It's shamanic type practices are used to connect to that, that energy, to that animal, but it is to embody that, to ask that spirit to be with you and let me be cunning like the wolf. Let me be, have perception of birds. Let me, have the pack and my group and my people with me. Let me be a strong like bear. You're asking for that to be connected to you. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it, but because again, the spirits can choose whether or not they're going to interact with you. But I can see it in you embody that animal to use it for your endeavors. And usually the masculine, the men, physically the warriors, would be the ones connecting with animal for those types of protective things. Because it's been like that for centuries. You guys have always been the protectors. You've always been up front. So yes, warriors can totally be spiritual too. And if anybody shoves that off, I'm sorry, you're missing the point here.
So that's pretty much it. The last topic we wanted to cover is healing, shamanism, and healing. This is something I have nothing to say on. These types of things were not used in the Norse world that we know of. There was one single example of Seidr, which is the parallel to shamanism. One single example of that being used to heal, and the rest is all used for like cursing, prophecy, divination, those types of things, changing the weather, and all that stuff. So healing, we know they used healing, but it seems like they did it more through sacrifice. The alpha blut was used for healing in the Norse sources, and rune magic. Basic a good portion of all of the runic amulets and runic sticks that we find were for healing. But as for shamanism, there are no ties to that I know of in the Norse sources. But yeah, and anything that you can think of, Stefan.
There's definitely people who are doing healing, and they have a very special kind of social status. Sometimes it was believed that they were the ones, that could put curses, which would lead to illnesses and so forth. And at the same time, the ones who could, heal from such things. And sometimes they are two distinct categories of people. Again, we're speaking about much later folklore. So there's definitely Christian influence, but in a lot of cases, I see just pure folk tradition. Essentially, mostly it was women who had this function, and there could be males. Specifically, also they could be males for the category of people that were healing, not the ones who were putting curses. The evil witches, they were mostly women, but the healers could be both, but yet they were mostly women. And it was necessary that they acquired the knowledge while they were not in their menstrual phase, so either prior, when they were a very young girl, or after, when they stopped, although there's exceptions, of course. Usually it's the elder woman who transmits the knowledge to her granddaughter, for example, and this is done on a bridge. So that's one of the way to become a healer, basically. And all of these visions and dreams involve, going to the other world, basically, and it involves climbing ladders, stairs, mountains to ascend to the sky, or going in holes and caves and so forth to go in the underworld. And basically that's where they either get this message like you have to do this or else, or they just, after so much traumatic events, they just have these complete breakdowns that they experience these things and return as healers. And it's interesting that they also cross a bridge in these experiences, like a bridge thin as hair or thin as a blade that only the righteous can cross, and that's how they get these abilities.
I'm glad you said all that, because it rung a bunch of bells with me. It's the same thing in the Scandinavian folk tradition. This is, of course, much later than official pagan times, but we think it's all pagan, so it's like we find a lot of the same things there. And I like what you brought up about those abilities. So it's not necessarily shamanism that is used, not like any kind of direct spiritual journeys or trance states, like that is used to heal someone, but to gain those abilities. Definitely, we can tie it to shamanism. To think about Odin when he hung on the tree for 9 nights, which is a representative of some shamanic type upper world or underworld journey, and then he learned the runes, and a lot of those runes have to do with healing. So to gain those abilities may be some sort of shamanic initiation ritual, but it's not necessarily used. You don't use shamanism every time someone has a little cough, So a lot about that. What do you have to say? There's probably a lot of ways you can go with it. I know it's used a lot more for healing in the Eastern traditions, but let us know what comes to your mind first.
It's just so many parallels. Like the whole time Stefan is talking, I'm like, yes. I'm just sitting here getting all pumped up in my microphone, and I'm learning so much from you. Just so you know, thank you so much. But yes, you hit the nail on the head as far as that goes. It's connecting to that spirit for the ability for healing. So yes, you do have some physical healing as far as like plant medicine and all that stuff goes. And again, medicine, yes, like, the physical plant, like chewing on plantain, making it into a poultice and putting it on a cut or a bite or something like that, it would heal you. There is actual herbalist medicine involved. But as far as healing, you also have the medicine plant as far as its knowledge goes to heal the body. It is a way of healing is done is the shaman is just the medium that gains the knowledge in between, or medicine woman or man or whatever it is you want to call it. You gain the knowledge and then use the ability. Like Stefan was saying, breath is so important. That is the lesson that I can't shout from the rooftop loud enough, because once you have gone into that intermediate, into that trance state, calling in all of the spirits that you want to assist to heal this person. Again, you're just a vessel calling in those spirits, calling in that knowledge. When you call it in, it has to come out somehow, right? And that's your breath. And your breath comes from your heart center. So it's coming from the purest part of you that's not altered by anything. In Peruvian medicine, you have this. Hold on, I got to read it off my notes here because my pronunciation is awful. It's huacha, Hucha, coming from the Cuero. And it is heavy energies that build and cause problems within a body. So like you said, it's not necessarily for healing a cold, but it's for healing very similar to the Norse version of luck, of things that happen around you and all that kind of stuff, and your interactions. Because if your huacha is very, very heavy and you're not connected to everything, you're not interacting with the spirits, and you're going to have bad luck, and you're going to have issues, and your crops are not going to grow. You're going to have problems with your family and your interactions with your communities, and also making you physically sick. So it's about that type of medicine as far as like the shamanic stuff goes. And as far as the calling, I wanted to speak on that Stefan was talking about, how healing goes from one person to another. There are, same thing, multiple ways on how that can pass down. It could be, passed down from one person to another. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. Passed down from one person to another. Or it can be kind of a calling that you are drawn to, that the spirits are pulling you into. Like, you're supposed to be a healer. With Peruvian, you have the Pacos, and then you have the Alto Masayos, which is like another version of a Paco. The Alto Masayos are the ones that are born every 3 generations, they think, and it's not necessarily just with them. It could be any person in the world. And this person, it is a calling. They are essentially married to the spirits. And if they don't follow this calling, things happen to them. So like their last Alto Masayo, she lived to 99 years old. And she would randomly disappear into the mountains, into the woods for days on end, come back naked and stuff, but with like a whole bunch of knowledge. And they don't know how she survived in the wilderness, all that stuff on her own, but she did. This woman had children and husbands die, because anytime she tried to pursue a life outside of this healing, outside of the calling that she was supposed to be, that life would fall apart. And the more of the refusal of that calling, the more the person falls into depression, falls into bad things happening in their life, into sicknesses, and then they eventually die. So the goal of a healer is to be selfless in that you are willing to let that knowledge and that the spirit and all that stuff inhabit you, and you breathe it out and you translate it, speak it, act it, whatever way you can, to heal that person, that community, that land, so on and so forth.